Wow.
It's a perfect day for apocalyptic.
But purgatory is just an intermediate place.
Oh yeah, purgatory can be fun. All your best friends will be there.
And your enemies.
Oh, gosh.
I just thought I'm pretty well skipping 2 Maccabees because it covers a little part of the ground in 1 Maccabee. There's nothing really new there, but there are some items in there that have had a profound effect on theology, and this is one of them. The doctrine of purgatory, a place that is not final and is neither hell nor heaven, has been around for a long, long time. It became a formal doctrine in the Christian church. The Catholic Church was pretty much one in the West, in the 13th century. But it was around before that. But not as a doctrine. You could believe it or not as you saw fit. But from the 13th century on, it has been dogmatic. Protestants all rejected it. They're back to it now rather than having it now. Protestants all rejected it at the time of Luther because of the emphasis on literal content of the Bible. It's not in there. It's not in there, but it is in 2 Maccabees in a funny kind of way. And since 2 Maccabees is included in the Catholic canon, but not in the canon or the Hebrew canon, in all the texts that refer to purgatory, you'll find a reference to that. It existed in pretty early Judaism. Something quite like it existed in Zoroastrianism, and some would say Zoroastrianism, it was the whole thing, everyone went to a temporary cleansing place, and then everybody was saved at the end. There were no, permanent casualties as in hell. So just to glance at it quickly, if I can find it. Stick all these pieces of paper in here, and I have no idea what they are.
If you didn't have purgatory, wasn't the whole issue of indulgences tied into purgatory? Because that was to get you out of purgatory. So, right. Because you didn't get out of hell on indulgences. You only got out of purgatory with indulgences.
Yeah, but that was coming.
Okay.
Yeah, indulgences really came in a big way at the time of the Crusades, because the popes of the Crusades, the Crusaders were a strange lot. I mean, a lot of them were, released from prison to go on the Crusades, and released from other kinds of confinement to go on the Crusades. So they were, a rabble, really. And they had to be persuaded that, being where they were in prison was not better than going on a crusade. And so 2 things were offered to them. If you find anything, you can have it. You can plunder. You can have booty, as long as it's from the bad guys. And your sins will all be forgiven. If you die in the Crusades, you will go to heaven because of, well, the term then was not technical yet, but because of an indulgence. Indulgence meaning a grant of mercy. So there it was. It was a great embarrassment for some time. Many medieval theologians had a lot of trouble with this. But it stuck. And then it became the doctrine of indulgences afterward, which has taken a number of different, twists and turns and forms. But it's still there. Some thought it would go at Vatican II. Notice limbo went after fairly recently. But it didn't go in Vatican II, and in fact, it's in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and John Paul II, actually wrote something about it, And so did Benedict the 16th, Ratzinger. He wrote something about it, thereby intending to kind of keep it in the realm of Catholic belief. But the Crusades were certainly the main practical impetus that it got. And many, of course, were outraged at this. How can the Pope say, you know, I'm going to forgive the sins? And you can't do that. You're just Pope. You're not God. So that gave rise to the idea that the Church could do this kind of thing in virtue of an entrusted power. So that's my long answer.
Okay.
Short one is yes.
Well, I still remember my missals from the 50s, and several prayers after it would say 300 days indulgence.
Yeah.
They all
Like they
have
even
those.
had it quantified.
Yeah, and you used to get quarantines, remember that? Does anybody remember them?
Quarantine?
Yeah, an indulgence covering so many quarantines.
What was the quarantine?
Quarantine is, well, it was from the French quarantaine, which meant 40. 40 wak.
Oh.
The idea was 40 days. But that came to be interpreted as, you know, you're going to get out of the clink 40 days earlier than you would have otherwise. The origin of it was actually quite different. In the early church, the early Middle Ages and late antiquity, there were assigned very laborious penances. The church assigned them. And, you know, so for doing this, you know, the confessor didn't have to kind of scratch his head and say, you know, 3 Our Fathers, 3 Hail Marys, or whatever. But he knew. I mean, there was a book. When you looked at it, for that you get this. And what you got was big. And one of the shortest things you could get was penance for 40 days. So when the indulgences were granted, they were based on the length of penance. So it didn't mean days out of purgatory. It meant it substituted for that many days of canonically assigned penance.
So it was taken off of what your bill was, what your
What you
debt was.
want,
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
You had, okay.
And the penance was public too, wasn't it?
All the penance was public, and I mean, it could include even, you know, not being able to talk to anybody. You know, you had to,
Kneel in the snow.
yeah,
Wear a hair shirt.
very unpleasant.
Did people keep track of these days? I mean,
Yeah,
like if you kept, like there was like a book of like, and then they take out.
Right.
There was an accounting.
yeah, they did keep track of them.
Okay.
And
Wow.
I mean, during much of this period, you were pretty lucky to get that kind of penance, because often they just say, not a chance, you know, you're hellfather. This was a very, very severe period. And it gave way, ultimately. It was gradually softened and made more like what we have now. And the penance was seen less and less as kind of a God torturing you because you were bad, and more as a kind of a, you know, self-improvement, you know, get yourself back together again. But that was quite an evolution, and the period of severe penance was, it was very severe indeed.
I bet you kept people from sinning too.
It kept people from sinning, but it also kept people from the church entirely.
Yeah.
Right.
It scared people, yeah.
Sure. Well, today is not like that.
I confess it.
You say one Hail Mary, that's it.
Yeah, and much of it was, you know, was public, and you knew what this, if you got that penance, well, you know what you get that one for.
I know what you've been doing. You've been a bad girl.
But anyway, those lengths of time, you know, ecclesiastically speaking, were substitutes for that much penance,
Okay.
not days out of purgatory
Okay.
or earlier release.
What you would have undergone if you were doing this public
If
penance.
you're doing the public penance, and your penance was for 40 days, and you got an indulgence of 1 quarantine, then the slate was cleaned off.
Time off for good behavior.
Yeah. And the fact that those quarantines were in there, I mean, the penances tend to be assigned in quarantines, multiples of 40 days, you know, which could be a pretty big piece of your life.
Yeah.
And you got the penance for what? I lost it.
Oh, you got the penance for sinning. Or voting for the wrong candidate.
We got it in here.
Yeah, there was
I guess you got it in
there was a
confession.
whole literature
Confession.
of books called sacramentaries, and these sacramentaries were there were different classes of them, but they were penitential sacramentaries, and they were basically checklists on who gets what for what. And the clergy, many of the clergy were, very ignorant. They were not educated at all until many of them until the Carolingian period.
Now, Jim, the whole question of going to individual confessional penance, really, the Irish was some. Now, before that,
Public.
it was all public.
And individual and public. So yeah, it wasn't, we have kind of group penitential rights and things like that now. That was not in the deal. When you confess to Almighty God and to the church was sitting right there looking at you. In the form of all your fellow parishioners.
So much for privacy.
Not much privacy, no. And since the penances were all, pre-assigned, there could be no privacy anyway, because if you were doing the penance, we knew what you had to have done in order to have that penance.
Well, usually, I mean, unless it was like in your thought, but usually in small villages or whatever, where everybody knew everything anyway.
That's right.
It was
Right,
like, if
sure.
it was some action
Sure.
or whatever, then it was kind of everybody
Yeah,
knew it,
yeah.
so.
Right. So no big surprise.
But the only ones.
And sometimes people would call for this, that guy.
Right. Yeah, that's what they.
So a lot of that, we're familiar with a lot of this from much later in Puritan Protestantism. All these bands and public, letter A's and things like that. They were around earlier, but the mainstream church had got rid of them long before that.
But the only people that could give a penance were clergy.
Yes. Yeah.
Only clergy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But not all clergy either. There were particular confessors, weren't there?
Yeah, there were. There was one of the, but in any town, the local clergyman would be empowered to do that. Where else are they going to go? But there were a lot of penances that could not be removed or reduced by anybody but a bishop, or
Right.
perhaps by the Pope. What was I gonna say? I don't know, some wonderful thought just escaped my mind. So,
So,
We were in
Jim, you were
purgatory.
saying that these were doctrines of the church, but not dogmas of the church.
oh, they were certainly not dogmas, they were practices.
Discipline.
Yeah. And also they differed considerably in different places. The Irish church was always, not always, but until relatively modern times, remarkably independent of Rome. So the Irish church tended to go its own way, and that meant developing some things that were models for the rest of the church. This is the way to go, and others that were not. So there were bad ones and good ones. But the Irish church was remarkably detached from Rome. And remember, Ireland was never part of the Roman Empire.
Right.
So, everything kind of stopped there.
Hadrian's Wall.
No, that's in Scotland.
Yeah. They thought about it, the Roman general, forget which general it was, but he kind of, looked across the Irish Sea and asked around. He said, "There's nothing there worth bothering." So little did he know, huh? Okay, what was I? Yeah, all of this was for purgatory. On the next day, this is 1 Maccabees 12, 939. 1 Maccabees 12:39. On the next day, as it now become necessary, Judas and his men, so this is Judas Maccabeus, went to take up the bodies of the fallen and to bring them back to lie with their kindred and the sepulchres of their ancestors. Then under the tunic of each one, are you with me? This is 40. 2 Maccabees, 12:4.
Two Maccabees.
You said one.
Oh, okay.
Two Maccabees.
Then under the tunic of each one of the dead they found sacred tokens of the idols of Jamnia, which the law forbids the Jews to wear. And it became clear to all that this was the reason these men had fallen. In other words, they would have won if they hadn't offended God by wearing these. So they all blessed the ways of the Lord, the righteous judge who reveals the things that are hidden, and they turned to supplication, praying that the sin that had been committed might be wholly blotted out. And they're dead. The noble Judas exhorted the people to keep themselves free from sin, for they had seen with their own eyes what had happened as the result of the sin of those who had fallen. He also took up a collection, man by man, to the amount of 2,000 drachmas of silver, and sent it to Jerusalem to provide for a sin offering. All of this assuming you can do something about these dead soldiers. In doing this, he acted very well and honorably, taking account of the resurrection. For if he were not expecting that those who had fallen would rise again, it would have been superfluous and foolish to pray for the dead. But if he was looking to the splendid reward that is laid up for those who fall asleep in godliness, it was a holy and pious thought. Therefore he made atonement for the dead so that they might be delivered from their sin. Now that, obviously if the dead are dead and praying for them makes any kind of sense, they can't be in hell because that wouldn't do the job. They couldn't be in heaven because why bother? So they have to be in some intermediate condition in which the prayers of the faithful would benefit them.
Makes sense.
What's that passage in 2 Maccabees?
2 Maccabees, 12.
12, okay.
Yeah, 39 to the end of the chapter.
That's kind of a stretch.
Yeah, kind of. And as I say, it's not a canonical text to any but Catholics now. But it's all there is. I mean, if you want something in the Bible or on the edge of the Bible that supports purgatory, it would be this.
So in Judaism, they don't have purgatory now?
Now some do, yeah.
Okay.
Now you can find it almost everywhere. I think most Lutherans still reject it. But it has a way of creeping back. It's, and you can kind of see why. People will say, this person died and he wasn't a saint, but he didn't seem to be like he deserved hell. So there's got to be something else if God is merciful.
Not good enough for heaven, not bad enough for hell.
Right,
There's got to be
right.
someplace to go.
Right. And
It makes
in
sense.
Islam, in the Quran, in the 7th surah of the Quran, there's a veil between heaven and hell, and there seem to be people on it, on this veil. And that seems to be also a kind of purgatory. They're looking to the left and the right, looking at hell, looking at heaven, examining themselves. And then I guess if they do it right, they get to go to the garden, as they put it there.
So that people can only get out of purgatory if you have people, we who are alive, to pray for them, or to do something for them, because they who are in purgatory can't do anything for themselves.
Right, right.
Until the end.
Until the end, yeah.
What about the end? What do you mean?
Oh, at the end, there's only heaven and hell.
Everybody's resolved.
So if you're still in purgatory on the last day, you
Right.
You going to have.
served your time.
You go to heaven because you served your time.
Yeah, if you're still in purgatory on the last day, you're gonna have it. Of course, the doctrine of purgatory, as I say, became formalized in the church in the 13th century And that was just in time for Dante to write the Divine Comedy, with one whole section of it is purgatory. But it's interesting to see how he uses it. I don't know how many of you have read Dante's Commedia, but purgatory is a mountain. And being in purgatory means slowly climbing up this mountain and working your way to the top. And when you get to the top, you're in the Garden of Paradise. And then you're whisked off to heaven from the Garden of Paradise. So you can see he's trying to present it as a kind of a rehab arrangement. You're strenuously trying, and the ring roads that you climb up, the switchbacks and all of that, are the cardinal sins and so on. And at each level there'll be some symbolic punishment, like the proud have these heavy burdens on their back, so they always have to be bowed down to get over their pride. And similarly with others.
And it supports, purgatory kind of supports reincarnation, don't you think? Because in reincarnation, you're going to come back and make good what you did before.
I never thought of that.
I guess I do, because...
But I mean, you're still you, though. Yeah, there's no new person.
But I mean, it is you. If you don't... That's what I mean. That's what...
Okay, tell me more.
Okay, let's say I did some bad stuff here.
Yeah.
So instead of going to purgatory, I reincarnate and I try to rectify.
Oh, okay.
Do
I see.
everything
Yeah.
to obliterate.
So
that,
you mean functionally it's sort of the same?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
Well, maybe
you
purgatory.
work this out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe purgatory is like the green room between performances or something. And I'm not being flip.
I get it. Yeah.
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 It almost reminds me when you talked about going up the mountain, like Jacob's ladder, like we are climbing Jacob's ladder, like at the top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in the Dante thing, you feel lighter and lighter.
Lighter and lighter, getting the
Yeah, you're kind of getting the dross removed as you work your way up. And since he already has the schemes of the, the capital sins and things like that, that's kind of made to order. You go from capital sin to capital sin, and he can arrange them in what he thinks is the most grievous to the least grievous.
Hell sure is bad. He portrays hell as really, really.
Oh, yeah, really bad.
Yeah. I remember I had nightmares about it.
Oh, did you really? From the...
Because I was in, what, 7th or 8th grade when I read it.
Ooh,
A little too young.
that's too early for Dante.
That's too early.
Well, of course, medieval painters loved it. I mean, you have all these
Hieronymus Bosch.
horned beings with pitchforks and you're stabbing people and pulling them up by the rear end and things like that. They're all over the art galleries. And you can see why it would attract an artist. I mean, all the contortions and combinations of colors and forms you could do this way, and they knew it would also give a kind of thrill, and so they did that. And then churches would buy them because they were a reminder of what might happen if you don't do like I said.
Yeah, it did it for me. For a while.
There's an account in the New Testament that suggests the belief in reincarnation might have been floating around. It's where a couple of disciples asked Jesus, was this man born blind because of his parents' sin or his sin? Now, the only way he could be born blind because of his sin was if he had time to sin before he was born.
Yeah.
Now, Jesus rejected both notions, but he didn't say it was impossible.
But the background of that is God punishing you and your descendants.
Yeah.
I mean, the original sin, Adam and Eve get punished, and we're still taking the rap. That's what Jesus is rejecting there, the idea this is not inherited guilt.
I once went to like a weekend retreat from someone who was kind of learned in Celtic, the Celtic spirituality, And he said that way back when, before, you know, the Irish church got contaminated with the Roman church, whatever, that in Celtic spirituality, they didn't have a concept of original sin. They had a concept of original blessing. And that they believed that everything God created was good. And that people could mess up. They didn't dispute the fact that people could sin, but that God, everything was originally blessed, and that didn't carry on, that it didn't pass on down. And so when the Irish church got connected and taken over by the Roman church, that kind of went its way.
Yeah.
But the Celtic background is really still an original blessing. It's an interesting
Yes, I've heard that too. And of course, before the Romanizing of the Irish church, you had beliefs that were held by a bunch of people, but they didn't say you have to believe that. We think that. And they would write devotional books based on that and preach on that basis. Yeah, I mean, in that sense, a much more theologically liberal atmosphere. Okay.
I have something about indulgences.
Yeah.
What is the practice of paying for masses for the dead? When did that come into practice or whatever?
You mean
Well, it's an offering. I mean, it's not supposed to be an economic deal. It's an offering to have a mass said. You know, it could be a mass for anything. It could be a mass of gratitude, or you know, mass for married people, or anything like that. So the offering is simply for the mass, and then the mass, a mass intention will then be, you have these intentions in the mass. One of them will be the release of somebody from purgatory. I don't know whether people, but you know best. You think people think they're buying a mass?
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought.
Well, can they have it said and not make a contribution?
Sure, we
Sure.
have a book
Yeah.
out there that you can write
Well, then
the
it's not, you know, so, I mean, you could go up and say, I want to have a mass said in his honor, but not make a contribution.
Yes.
And that would still,
Well,
you'd
if
still
it's
have it
compulsory,
made.
it's not an
Yeah.
offering, it's a tax or a fee.
Yeah.
And you don't say the poor souls, you say the holy souls.
The whole.
Yeah,
Right, the
right.
whole-
And my kinfolks, les défunts, the defunct members
Oh
of the
yeah,
family. Yeah.
Oh, the defunct.
Yeah. So, in the cemeteries, frequently you have that quote, "It is a good and holy,
Yes,
wholesome thought."
that's where it came from.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah,
That's old Judas.
yeah.
The good Judas.
That's good. That's interesting.
Okay, anything more on that?
And of course, you had the parsing of indulgences. Like you had the totiers, quotiers, that as often as you, for example, around All Saints' Day,
Oh, yeah.
that as often as you go into the church and you pray six Our Fathers, 6 Hail Marys, 6 Glory Bees, as often as you do that, that often you can, and you could get them out of hell or out of purgatory yourself.
Yeah.
That as often as you pray this for this person, so often you will receive this indulgence. And we would do, my God, when it sounds like sacrilege, that at the chapel at the seminary in Notre Dame, that you'd come in from the hall and go in, say your 6 Our Fathers, 6 Hail Marys, Glory Bees, and then go out. You would have a list that you would take care of all your kinfolks who are now out of purgatory. Check them all. Totiers, quotes.
There goes Joe.
The Mormons do something similar, right? And isn't that why they go so
Mormons?
deep into genealogy? The Mormons.
Yes, they have baptism for the dead.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
true.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, and they baptize
Yes.
the dead. I went to Philadelphia, the Mormons just built a Mormon temple there. And before they consecrate the temple and shut it off to the outside, they had a period of time where you could go and visit and take a tour. Because once it's shut off and consecrated, no non-authorized
becomes a
Mormon
kind of
can
holy of
go in
holies,
there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I had the opportunity, I was back in Philadelphia the day before they were gonna shut it down, so I did take the tour. And it was very interesting because they have a huge baptismal pool, beautiful, tile from wherever, beautiful. That's not to baptize any of the living. That's that you go in to bring your ancestors.
Yes.
No, there are no baptism in there of the living. And then they have a marriage room. Now, the only way you can go in there as a Mormon is to be authorized by the head, Mormon, and that means that you've paid in good state. You are, you're worthy. It's not like I'm a Mormon, I want to go. No. So, but it was very interesting, and that you're married for life, and your children, and the marriage means when it's consecrated in the temple, that you all go to heaven together, your children and whatever. You remain together in heaven as a family. So
We like to think that.
yeah.
We like to think that, but it's nowhere in
That's kind of their doctrine. So it was very, very interesting. And of course, I'm thinking, there'll be some family members I don't think then you begin to think about it.
Gosh.
Yeah, you can pick your
But you
family.
forgive these members when you die. You forgive these members when you don't die.
That's true. When you're in the presence of God, you don't have any.
Yeah, you forgive.
Right, yeah, it's true.
Well, in principle, when you made it through purgatory, you're all cleaned up and you're very presentable, and you're also very forgiving, so everybody's going to get along just fine.
Right. And there's no marriage or giving in marriage, so you won't know who's who anyway.
Right.
Well, Mitt Romney and his wife were married in that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, they're
Very up there.
They're in good standing.
Yes.
very good standing.
Incidentally, in the Eastern Church, the Eastern Christian, Eastern Catholic Church, there's no penal purgatory. Purgatory, the doctrine is there, but it's a time of sort of spiritual improvement.
It's not a
You
punishment.
don't get beat up or anything.
Okay.
It's time of
Yeah, it's kind of like,
Like a retreat.
submitting to a guru and, having your spiritual faculties sharpened and made more sensitive and so on. So there's nothing scary about Eastern purgatory. So we have to choose a purgatory.
I choose that
That's
one.
the one.
So the Eastern Church, though, didn't have, because was that always their belief? Because if they had that belief, then why would you wouldn't be working really hard to get that person out of there, would you?
No, they're not big on getting people out of there.
Okay, all right.
That's not a big thing.
Okay.
That's very much.
Okay.
And of course, it got a big both boost and kick from the Tetzel and the indulgence preaching before Luther, which was really awful. It's interesting to read some of Tetzel's sermons. I mean, they're kind of masterpieces of commercial rhetoric. Just telling the people, remember the members of your family who have passed away. Okay, were you always as kind to them as you should have been? Were they as good as they would have to be to go directly to the face of God? Uncle Bill, no. Well, you can do something now. You can do something now to make up for your neglect during their lives and to improve their condition. And then they were actually rhymes, little kind of commercial jingles. They were in German. I don't remember them, but one is the rhyme between klingt and springt. Basically, it's when your coin in the place klingt, the soul of your loved one from purgatory springt. And everybody knew these. It was like that.
And Martin Luther really was very strong against that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, he thought it was an abomination.
That was the main thing, wasn't it? His
What was
main
one?
objection.
Oh, that was the main
That
thing,
was the
yeah.
main, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
you
that
know,
was kind of the
I've-
last straw.
I've often wondered why the whole question came up, but then I realized
Oh.
that when you have people like Michelangelo or Bellini, or you've got these
A lot of
masterpieces
invoices
being
come
done,
in.
those weren't done free. You had
Right.
to pay for that.
Yeah.
And in buildings, whether it's St. Peter the Dome or whatever it might be,
Sure.
it's the master or these masters had to be supported. Even though Michelangelo was always fussing that he wouldn't get, he wasn't
Yeah.
paid.
Right.
But I mean,
that-
there were all these other guys too. I mean, just, stonemasons and all
That's
that.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
I mean, the reason for getting, I mean, Tetzel was the hottest preacher going. He was a celebrity preacher. They can't resist him. So he was put under contract by the Pope to do this thing. And the reason why it had to be done was the Pope was immensely in debt.
Yeah.
And he had no resources to pay him. He had already tapped all his, the parishes were already being drained of Peter's pence had become Peter's big bucks.
Now, what was the name of
What
the
was the
orchard?
name?
What was his name?
Tetzel, Tetzel.
Okay,
He was a Dominican.
yeah.
All it's missing is an 800 number
Yeah,
to call,
exactly.
and,
yeah.
get out your credit
Oh, it's,
card.
you read them, they're just
Yeah.
like commercials and that.
Yeah.
That's it. But with all that touching stuff beforehand,
Yeah.
Have you been as kind as you should have been and all. I mean, he
Wow.
had them really eating out of his hand.
Wow.
He knew what buttons to push, huh?
It sure did.
Sounds like he hypnotized him.
Yep. And he toured everywhere. It was, and others imitated him. But he was the best and the one who attracted much attention.
It seems though that, and this is a little bit off and else stuff, but it got me thinking. It seems like the focus on sin, and even in Matt, is what maybe you've done. The focus didn't seem to be that much on what you didn't do.
You mean,
Like commit.
I never hurt
act of
anybody, but I
commission.
never did anybody any good either.
Well, like you didn't feed the poor.
Yeah, right.
It wasn't that you took food from someone,
Yeah,
stole,
yeah.
but that the sin is that you didn't do something that would have been something
Yeah.
that you should have done.
Omission and
Omission
omission.
rather than
Yeah.
omission or commission.
Yeah.
But the whole focus got to be on, it seems, commission.
Yeah.
You say your sins, you really don't say what you omitted to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So-
often been pointed out by Jews because, as you've seen, in the Torah and the Old Testament, there's a great emphasis on omission. You did not feed the widow. You did not feed the
Right.
orphan. You did not leave your food after. But with Christianity, that kind of vanished.
Right.
And the sin thing was all based on what you did, not what you left undone.
Yeah.
Now in the liturgy we have, repenting of what I have done and what I have left undone, which would kind of cover that. But yeah, there's been that bias. And a lot of it had to do with, the whole thing was placed within a legal criminal law framework based on Roman criminal law. And you can't prosecute people for not doing things unless it's, not feeding their children or something like that. The prosecution always looked at deeds done, bad deeds done.
You can persecute safety-wise if you haven't provided certain safety division, things.
Yeah.
You can sue for that.
Mhm.
Omitting, I guess it's companies.
Mhm.
But the Christian, the Jesus message was heavily on omission.
He said, whatever you fail to do for
I mean, it was-
anybody, you
I
failed
mean,
to do
his-
for me.
The message in
You want a
the
hand
New
sanitizer?
Testament was heavily, it seemed, on
Not
Sermon on the
violations,
Mount,
but
like, like it was
Yeah.
heavily on omission, but it seems like
Yeah.
it got in practice over the years, maybe because of law,
Mhm.
heavily on commission.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the Romanizing of the system had a lot to do with that. The legal formulation of it. That affected a lot of things. Even dogmas got more and more kind of legal in form.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right about Jesus. I mean, Jesus' moral message is always about, loving and therefore doing something beneficial to others, and always the emphasis on the enemy, those who hate you.
Yeah, much more on the thou shalt nots.
Yeah.
Yeah, that thou shalt not, right.
Yeah. Yeah, that thing in Paul even,
Like the Beatitudes?
anybody knows you
Right.
should be nice to your friends, but that's not what we're talking about. Or we blew this out of you. Okay, let's move on to Daniel.
Oh, that's apocalyptic.
Daniel is a book written as though it, well, let's just look at the beginning of it. It says Daniel say when he is, but he really isn't. Yeah. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim of Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord let King Jehoiakim of Judah fall into his power, etc., etc. 3. Then the king commanded his palace master Ashpenaz to bring some of the Israelites of the royal family and of the nobility, young men without physical defect, etc. So that's where Daniel comes into the picture. Therefore, this is written as though it were written in the Assyrian period, Nebuchadnezzar. It certainly wasn't. It was written in the 1st or 2nd century before the Common Era. And that becomes clear as you read it and discover that the author was really very mixed up about the history of the time he's pretending to be in. These people were not there then, and says someone was the son of somebody, but he wasn't. And we have the Assyrian records, you can check it out pretty well. So this is one more of those, an outstanding example of a book written much later, as though it were written long before, talking about events that he's looking at, as though they were being anticipated by a prophetic vision from the remote past. When was the book actually written? He seems pretty clear about Antiochus IV of Epiphanes. He doesn't know that Antiochus IV Epiphanes died. So it seems to have been written during the lifetime of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And that would bring us down to 167. So I won't belabor this thing on the dating, just happy to take my word for it that the historical references don't make sense. So it's pretending that, and this is of course to give it, we've seen this in other texts, it's to give it that impact of a vision seen by a prophet Daniel 600 years ago, and what he saw will reassure us now, because his vision is going to be all these terrible occupations by enemies took place, and they come right down to, they're never named, he never names Antiochus IV. It's all apocalyptic figures. He's a little horn on the head of an animal. But don't worry, because this vision sees he's going to go and you're going to be okay. So it's pretty clearly written in that strange apocalyptic manner to be a source of consolation and hope to those who were suffering under Antiochus IV Epiphanes in the 2nd century BCE. Okay. Now the book of Daniel falls into two fairly obvious pieces. The first piece are little stories. Little stories in which Daniel or Daniel's close associates, his companions, are involved. And that's, Daniel in the lion's den and things like that we all know about. And you also get little stories about kind of Daniel the holy detective, who's like, if some of you I'm sure remember, Susanna and the Elders.
Yeah.
Susanna is framed by these guys, and Daniel finds a tricky way of interviewing them separately. You know, a district attorney is tricked to this day.
Yeah.
So there are a number of those. And those also are obviously intended to reassure. You know, the most awful thing that could possibly happen looked like it was going to happen, but no. God inspired Daniel to fix it. The bell and the dragon. We may have time to look at these, but there was a statue of Baal in dragon form, and worship of him was reinforced by the fact that after they closed the doors on him at night, he always had his dinner. They left a meal for him. And when they opened in the morning, look, it's all gone. So, and look how he's smiling. So the statue was understood to consume the food. And here again, you know, Daniel, the spiritual detective, is able to prove that that wasn't so.
Jim, that sounds like Santa Claus and the cookies.
Where did that go?
Where did we get that from?
And he had a coat.
Circumstantial evidence.
So that's the first part of the book of Daniel. Stories like that. Two of them, Bel and the Dragon and Susanna and the Elders, were more disputed as canonical, so they're in the Bible, in the Catholic Bible, but not in everybody else's, and sometimes detached from the book of Daniel, sometimes printed right after them as additions to the book of Daniel.
What's it called then?
It's just called, well, they're called pseudepigrapha. They can be called pseudepigrapha. Is that what you mean, a general label?
How you would be able to look it up, though?
Well, when you look it up just under the title, it would be Susanna and the Elders
Okay.
and Bel and the Dragon.
The third Saturday of Lent.
Chapter
Uh-huh.
13
Yeah.
is Susanna.
Yeah.
The closest thing to porno that we had in Europe.
Yeah, everybody kind of woke up for that
That's
one.
right.
Yeah, there is a slightly soap opera quality. But it gives you an idea of one of the images of Daniel. That he was he was devoted to God, and he was also shrewd and knew how to unmask plots. And
This, the New Revised Standard Version has them listed, additions like to the Book of Esther. Additions, and they have the prayer of Ariziah and the Psalm of the Three Jews, Susanna, Bel and the Dragon. Listed under
that's the other one, the one that you mentioned, Azariah and the, it's the boys in the fiery furnace,
They're
and
called
they sing a song.
Apocryphal Deuterocanonical books. Okay.
Daniel in the lion's den is one of those tales?
Yes.
Okay.
Is Bel and the Dragon, is that written in Hebrew? Is that the reason why it was left out, or is it just they just found it in Greek? Because I remember you saying, you know, that they weren't in the Protestant Bible because they weren't, they didn't find it in Hebrew. So
no, they were just not always there. You had manuscripts of Daniel, and these things were not there. In another one, they were there. So they were kind of questionable. Are they something somebody's trying to attach to the book of Daniel? What they were written in is interesting too. Daniel itself is written partly in Hebrew and partly in Aramaic.
Right.
And that's true also of these editions. And no one knows quite why. I mean, it could be as simple as, you know, a couple of secretaries, you know, one of whom was fluent in Aramaic and not in Hebrew. That could well be. So,
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Good old boys.
I hear the word of the Lord. Now the second part of the book of Daniel is entirely different. From there on, it's apocalyptic visions. And this is the first full-scale apocalypse in the Old Testament. There's no other. There was a little apocalyptic in Ezekiel and a little bit here and there, but this is a fully developed apocalypse. And since we have a little time, let me take just one thing out of it. It makes reference to the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man. So the Son of Man, which Christians are familiar with, because it comes up in the Gospel so much, makes its first and only Old Testament appearance in one text in the book of Daniel, 7:3, I think. Now that title, Son of Man, is, I mean, it sounds kind of nice that way. But Son of Man is a literal translation of what in Hebrew would mean just a man. Because Hebrew often attaches a kind of genetic follow-up to emphasize that something is human. Man, Son of Man. The most amusing example of this from Hebrew is in the Gospels. You have Jesus having his disciples bring him an ass, the foal of an ass. Well, that's just one animal.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, an ass, okay? You know? But medieval writers said, okay, he's got a big donkey and he's got a baby donkey. And in medieval paintings, you'll see him riding them both. You know, his leg is over one of them, and the other leg's hanging down over the other. You know, I mean, this comes from a literalism. Okay, they said he rode into Jerusalem on an ass and the foal of an ass. How did he do that? Kind of like this. So that son of, foal of, offspring of, is just a way of emphasizing the species. And it can be daughter of, in the case of a female, you know, etc. So Son of Man just means man. Ancient of Days, similarly, just means an old guy. You know, I'm an Ancient of Days, just as much as the one in there is just an old man. But Ancient of Days sounds kind of good. I mean, you're sort of glad they kept that. Ancient of Days has a kind of majestic, sonorous quality about it. We're just the old guy. I mean, you know, a man came and sat beside an old guy. It doesn't sound apocalyptic. Okay. Now, the Son of Man appears a lot in the book of Enoch. The book of Enoch is, of course, apocalyptic. And in a very similar scenario to this, but developed more. Again, it's apocalyptic. We have the Son of Man coming, the Ancient of Days already there, as I say literally, the someone who looks like a man coming and sitting next to an old man. That's in the book of Enoch. And then when you turn to the New Testament, this phrase, Son of Man, appears 82 times. In every instance, it's spoken by Jesus. No one else ever speaks it. And Jesus, in many cases, seems clearly to be talking about himself.
Yeah.
And in the other cases, he may be talking about himself. The only other usage of it in the New Testament is Acts of the Apostles has it, but it's just a reference to Daniel. Just 7:3. So that raises questions for biblical historians. Does that mean that Jesus liked this title and clung to it and referred to himself by that name? Or that somebody else, you know, who wrote the Gospels assigned that to Jesus? If Jesus picked it, why did he pick it? You can see there's not that much there. Jesus applies it to all kinds of he does apply it to, you know, to the last judgment when the Son of Man will sit there and all.
Does he just mean it applying to his human nature?
That,
That's
yeah,
what I would say, son of man, his human nature,
Yeah.
not the divine nature.
that's right. That seems to be the case.
Mhm.
Also to powers, the Son of Man could do this, or can do this, and so on. So in a lot of different connections, he seems to be, as you say, saying human, human, but will be there at the last judgment in an official capacity, and empowered. But the question remains, why? Why would Jesus say this and then nobody else use it? You'd think they'd be possibly talking to one another. This guy's the Son of Man. That's what he wants to be called. But no, it doesn't come up there. Nor does Paul make any reference to it, whatever.
Yeah.
Which is
But
older.
they use the expression, born of a woman under the law. And of bringing in both God and man, divine and human.
Sure.
That may be heretical, I don't know, Chuck.
No, it's not. But it's not this phrase. It's not
He
this.
was born of a woman under the law.
This phrase is Ben Adam, son of man, son of Adam, Ben Adam. It doesn't mean Mr. Adam of the book of Genesis. It just means man. And it seems to be a favorite of Jesus, and yet strangely unknown to everybody else. Why? A lot of articles are written on that, and you know as much when you read them as you did before you opened them.
The Trinity song. Had to be explained.
The children
Let's just take a look at that one. This is one of the apocalyptic passages. Chapter 7 of Daniel.
Yeah.
In the first year of King Belshazzar of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and the visions of his head as he lay in bed. Let's go right down to 9. As I watched, thrones were set in place, and an ancient one, that's the Ancient of Days. Again, literally, we should be translated the old person. Took his throne. His clothing was white as snow. The hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. Very apocalyptic imagery. A stream of fire issued and flowed out from his presence. 1,000,000 served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood attending him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were opened.
That's the book of Revelation.
Yeah, very much the book of Revelation. Yeah, that's certainly where it comes from. Then down at 11, as I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a human being, son of man, Ben Adam. One like a Ben Adam. So a human-looking something. Coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and kingship, and all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. Familiar enough. So there's where it comes from. It's clearly big in the Jesus passages of the Gospels, and yet unknown to Paul. He certainly would use it if he knew it, and not touched by any other spokespeople in the Gospel.
Well, it's got a reason.
I leave you to share my ignorance.
Thank you.
It's got to be a reason.
Thank you.
Thank you.